So first, we are in a friendship famine. As you can see from this chart, in 1990, about 3% of people had no friends. By 2021, that amount has raised to 12% of people. These statistics are worse for men. About 5 times as many men have no friends in 2021 compared to 1990. And then when you look at the number of people that have 10 or more friends, was once 1 out of every 3 people, and now just 13% of people. Why is this a critical problem? Why is this awful for us and for our society? Well, this is a public health problem because connection is critical. It's vital for both our physical and our mental health. In fact, it is one of the most vital factors overall that we see in the research that predicts both physical and mental health. So we see this in this study, which looks at very happy people. So when you look at very happy people and very unhappy people in your life, what's the key difference between them? And there are factors like how much they exercise that determines these differences, or factors like how spiritual they are that influences these differences. But the most pronounced difference between happy and unhappy people is that the happy people are highly connected. We also see on research on depression, this study looked at 106 factors that influence people's likelihood of having depression, things like going for walks or things like exercising. And it found that the number one factor that prevents against depression is having someone to confide in. So connection has a massive effect on our mental health and well-being. When we look at connection and mortality rates, we find that overall, when we're disconnected, we are more susceptible to disease. And so in this study, people were exposed to the common cold virus. And the researchers tracked who is actually going to contract the common cold out of the people that we exposed the virus to. And it was people that were in ongoing severe conflict that were in fact 2.5 times more likely to catch the cold. Smokers, 3 times more likely. People with a less diverse social network, 4.2 times more likely to catch the common cold after being exposed to the virus. This research is wild. This is one study that I got from one of my students. I teach a class on loneliness, why we're so lonely. One of my students, Taya, exposed me to this research that actually finds that when you track how lonely people are, and they get vaccinated with the flu vaccine, and you look at their antiviral response 1 month to 4 months later, you find that people that are lonely actually have a lesser antibody response to the flu vaccine. The question is, what is happening? Like, why loneliness? I think often we think about it as just a feeling. I feel lonely, right? We don't think of it as something that's ravaging our insides, that's compromising our immune systems. John Cacioppo, the late John Cacioppo, loneliness researcher, he investigated why loneliness is so toxic for us. And he argues that, historically, if you think about it, we always traveled in tribes. And when you're separated from your tribe, that's when you're lonely. When you're separated from your tribe, you are in danger. So loneliness in our bodies is a sign that we are in danger. Our body goes into fight or flight mode. Inflammation happens. When we are lonely, we engage in something called micro-wakes, where we wake up for milliseconds at a time to scan our environment for threats. Loneliness isn't just a feeling. It is a way of viewing the world. The ways we see the world are completely different when we're lonely. Lonely people report liking other people less. Lonely people report reacting to more hostility towards other people. Lonely people report seeing rejection from other people even when it's not there and reacting with more vengeance. And so loneliness then is a chronic stress state, I would argue the most common trigger of chronic stress that puts our body into this fight or flight mode that ravages our bodies over time. And that's why we see meta-analyses, which combine all of the existing research that exists, find that exercise decreases our rate at risk of death over time, 23 to 30%. Diet, up to 24%. But having a large social network, 45%. 45%. That's like diet and exercise combined in terms of having a large social network and its impact on your mortality. Okay, so connection is important. We don't want to be lonely. This is some takeaway from this lecture so far. But the question is, can't we just rely on one person for connection? Like a lot of us have been taught to just rely on a spouse, become very insular with our families. And I'm here to make the case that relying on one person does not give us the connections that we need as human beings. As human beings, we need an entire community to feel whole. But we see that the trend is, over time, as we get older, we spend more time with our partner, if we have one, and less time with nearly everyone else in our lives, including our friends. The golden age for friendship is actually around 25. That's where we're acquiring more friends. We're spending more and more time with our friends. It's changing a little bit now for Generation Z because of technology. But as we get older, we tend to spend less time with our friends, even though as we become older, obviously we become a greater risk of mortality. Friendship becomes even more important for our health and well-being. One of the reasons why friendship is so key for us feeling connected is because there's actually 3 different types of loneliness. There's intimate loneliness, which is a desire for a close, intimate connection, right? That is like a spouse. That's like a best friend. Some of you may have that relationship with other members of your family, whether it be a parent or a sibling. But there's also relational loneliness, which is a desire for a close friend in your life. And then there's also collective loneliness, which is a desire to be part of a group working toward a common goal. And so what that means is that even if we are very, very happily married, we could still be experiencing relational or collective loneliness. I don't know about you, but this really hit home to me during the pandemic when I had my live-in partner, and I was like, something's off. I still feel really uneasy. I feel like I need more connection than this. Being around one person all the time, it makes me feel really cooped up. And I think as a friendship expert, I understand that when you're around one person all the time, you're only having one experience of yourself, because different people bring out different sides of us. And so we need different people in our lives to bring out the different sides of us, the parts of us that maybe this family member or this spouse that we spend most of our time with doesn't share. We need an outlet to express those different sides, to feel full in our very sense of self, in our sense of our identity. The other thing is that, a lot of the times I feel like people pit friendship and marriage against each other. Like, you're spending more time with your friends, you're spending less time with me. But what we see from the research is that people who are more happily married, part of the reason that they're so happy is because each person in that marriage has community outside of each other. And so in this study, we find that when people had conflict with their spouse, it was related to maladaptive release of the stress hormone cortisol. But not when people had quality connection outside of the marriage. Friends were able to sort of regulate this cortisol increase that happens in times of conflict with our spouse. And so in fact, friends are a resource for our romantic relationships because they regulate us so that we can go back to our romantic partner feeling like we're more at ease, feeling like we're more grounded, feeling more ready to work through that conflict without blaming or attacking each other. We also find this research on other significant others that finds that when we rely on different people to fulfill our emotional needs, our well-being improves across the board. So let's say I get a ticket in Washington, D.C., which happens all the time. Unfortunately, I know you have some people from DC here. Hopefully you can corroborate. Hopefully it's not just me. And so if I call my dad and tell him I got a ticket, he'll be like, Marisa, why are you calling me about this? I don't care. But if I call my mom and tell her I got this ticket, she'll be like, oh, Marisa, I can't believe they did that to you. That is so unfair. Now, if I'm relying on my dad to fulfill all of my emotional needs, my self-worth is going to be shot. every ticket I get, I will feel worse and worse about myself. But because I have my mom, and I know I can go to my mom when I'm upset, she's the person who's able to help me. And I feel better and better, right? And so similarly, if we're just relying on our spouse to help us deal with our sadness or help us deal with our anger, but our spouse isn't always good with helping us deal with anger, isn't always good with helping sit with our sadness, then if we can vary and we can customize and we can say, okay, I know that this isn't, my spouse's strong suit, so maybe I'll go to this other friend in my life, this other member of my community when I need help working through this emotion, then we're going to feel better overall. Okay, and so last bit of evidence as to why we need an entire community and not just one person. In fact, research finds that when we interact with friends, not only are we less depressed, but also our spouse is slightly less depressed. So ripple effects, what makes us happy, connection and community, will also make our primary partner happy. Okay, so, as someone who studies friendship, I'm always up against just this idea that friendship is a lesser relationship. It's kind of like romantic love with screws missing of sex and deep intimacy. And like I mentioned, historically, this has never been true. It's a great anomaly to see friendship this way. And in fact, Marsilio Ficino, he created the term platonic based off of Plato. And what he said was that friendship was a deeper form of love because it transcends the physical. We don't need to have sexual intimacy to bind us together. We use these deep markers of compatibility to stay connected to each other. And so what I mean when I say this is that we don't have to see friendship as lesser. We don't have to see friendship as less important. And that friendship can be just as deep, just as powerful, just as fulfilling a force of love in our life as any other form of love, whether that be familial or romantic. He says, "For it does not desire this or that body, but desires the splendor of the divine light working through bodies." And this is a quote, I think, that puts this all together, why we need friends, from Esther Perel, one of my favorite therapists. She says, "The quality of our relationships determines the quality of our lives."